Thank you all for joining us for the Applying for Graduate College Scholarships workshop. Joining us today are Brianna, Executive Director of Graduate Financial Services and Business Operations, Dr. Jenna Dufek, Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs and Professor in the School of Integrated Health Sciences, and Nicole Thomas, Graduate Student and Graduate Research Assistant, our GPSA President and Fellowship Recipient. Looks like I'm getting some feedback. Wasn't letting me. So I'm gonna go ahead and hand it over to them to introduce themselves and share a little bit about their involvement with different components of the scholarship and fellowship process. And then we're gonna go ahead and take questions. So I will hand it over to Dr. Dufek to start us off.
Thank you, Nevna. Good morning, everyone. As Nev said, my name is Janet Dufek, and I am currently the Vice Provost in the Office of Faculty Affairs. Prior to moving into this position, I've been involved with Graduate College in several roles. Been a grad faculty fellow, and last year served as a senior grad faculty fellow, I think. But I also served as a co-chair of the Scholarship and Fellowship Committee. And it's to that point that perhaps you can pick my brain today. So welcome, I'm glad you're all here.
Bree, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Brianna. I work here at the Graduate College. And my main role in the scholarship and fellowship process is myself and my team, we basically take the process from the application time until all the awards have been submitted by the deadline. We go through all the applications, we make sure students meet minimum requirements, application materials are in, we filter questions from applicants, all up until we send those applications over to the committee. And then I'm involved with the committee, various points throughout the process, and then again at the end when it comes time to awarding the scholarship. And then I will pass it over to Nicole.
Awesome, thank you, Bree. Hello, everyone. My name is Nicole Thomas, and I'm the current GPSA president. So that's your student government. I'm also a PhD student. This is my first semester of my PhD program. I received my Master's of Science from UNLV in August, and then my bachelor's in biology back in, I want to say 2013, or no, 2017. So two-time UNLV grad, and also a grant and fellowship recipient. So I'll be here talking to you all today about like how to apply for grants, how I find grants, and how to be a successful applicant. So looking forward to the workshop.
Thank you all so much for introducing yourselves. And as you can all see, we have a lot of great different perspectives about the application process for scholarships and fellowships. So I just wanted to remind everyone before we dive into the workshop questions to please either type them in the chat if you have any, or you can directly chat me or unmute yourself to ask them. So we'll go ahead and dive in right now. We know that the Graduate College website has a graduate fellowships and scholarships webpage, but can you all explain to us the difference between a scholarship and a fellowship?
Sure, why not?
Go ahead, Janet.
Generally, there are fine lines here. Generally, scholarships are financial one-off awards that are very specific. They're for a very specific focused things. So for example, there may be a benefactor who's interested in contemporary art in the 1900s. So if you are a student in that area and you apply for the scholarship, it is for that particular purpose. A fellowship, on the other hand, is typically more long-term, and it is for past accomplishments as well as prior needs and work. So it tends, fellowships tend to be directed to those that are more advanced in their studies, as opposed to a specific point in time in a particular offering. Bree, anything to add?
Yeah, generally for scholarships and fellowships, we also see a big difference in the amount that's awarded. So I would say for the scholarships that I've seen awarded, we typically don't see anything much higher than $5,000. Scholarships can be merit-based, need-based, or based on other qualifying events. When we see fellowships, we're really seeing those mostly at the doctoral level, and they're really focused on the student's research, like Janet said, their prior research activities and their future research activities. And we see the amounts higher that they cover your tuition, your fees, and they offer a stipend for living expenses. So we really see fellowships more as, allowing the student to focus on their research without having to worry about outside financial things.
Yeah, I think those were some great adds to the question, Bree. So it's sort of like scholarship is a one point in time, right? And a fellowship is, hey, this is I'm going to free up time to focus on this, and therefore, so that was great.
And if I could just add, fellowships also sometimes come with deliverables. So what that means is that if you are awarded the money, they're expecting a product out of it. So whether that's presenting at a conference or publishing a paper, submitting like a finalization report or something like that. Like I received the Nevada NASA fellowship for, let's see, that was like a couple of years back. But that required me to complete all my work, submit a report of what I've done, and then present it at a conference as well. So all of those things had to be submitted in order for me to continue being eligible for the fellowship.
That's great, Nicole. So you can't just take the money and run, right?
Thank you all. So while we're on kind of this topic of definitions, and for those of us that are kind of new to this stuff, can you tell us also the difference between a grant and a loan?
Want me to jump in
Go,
again?
Bree.
Okay. So for grants, we kind of see those as similar to scholarships, but they're really mostly, I would say at UNLV, focused on need-based and merit. You will see at UNLV, you'll probably see like an access grant that's added to your account sometimes that you're not applying for. So these grants are really based on your need and your merit, and these are based on submitting your FAFSA or your alternate need determination form. I always stress to students every year to get your FAFSA or your alternate need determination form in before the priority deadline, because this really makes you eligible for some, free money that doesn't have to be repaid from the institution, that can help with your educational expenses. Now, loans, on the other hand, you do have to repay those back. Graduate students, they are eligible for unsubsidized loans from the Department of Education, which means the interest starts accruing on those loans from the moment that you take them out. And so if you're not making payments while you're attending school, that interest is being added to your principal balance. So I still just be really careful about loans, take out just what you need. That's why scholarships, fellowships, and grants are so important, because they can kind of help offset those costs. So you want to make sure, when you're done with your program, you want to know what you're getting into in terms of having to repay those loans and what they're going to cost at the end.
So just to add one more piece of, or one more perspective, you all have probably seen your advisors writing grants, right? So they're seeking extramural funding to support you or the laboratory or something like that. If they're fortunate to receive those, as Bree said, they do not have to be paid back. There may be a product, a deliverable. But have you ever gone to your bank and asked for a grant to buy a car? I think it's usually a loan. They expect you to pay it back, right? So that's might be a nice way to separate those out.
Thank you both. We had a follow-up question to what Bree had said. Where can we find these priority deadlines, or just deadlines in general?
So let me pop in the link to financial aid for you guys, but the priority deadline for the FAFSA, you'll find that on financial aid's website. And while that is the priority deadline, you can actually start submitting your FAFSA before that date. For graduate college scholarships and fellowships, our awards are on our website, and I will pop that in there as well. But good rule of thumb for graduate college scholarships and fellowships, we open the portal every year on October 1st for the following academic year, with a deadline of December 1st. That's going to be the majority of the scholarships and fellowships that we offer here at the Graduate College. And I want to say the FAFSA deadline is November 1st, but you can submit it as early as October 1st. Let me find that link for you guys, though, just so you have that information.
Thank you, Bree.
So just to add to that, as Bree is adding the graduate college scholarships and fellowships information, you know, it does take some time to put these things together. And as Bree said, the portal will open October 1st. So I would encourage you to read all about them ASAP. You can even read about what was offered last year to give a sense for what you may qualify for, because that December 1st deadline creeps up pretty quickly.
Yeah, just to piggyback on what Janet said, you know, December 1st is the deadline, but you do not want to start that application on December 1st. You want to start it on October 1st and get all your materials ready.
So we had a follow-up on a question about FAFSA. Do you need to submit a new FAFSA annually?
So I even submit them as a graduate student. Yes, 100%. I recommend that you submit that whenever you can every year, because that will essentially guarantee you funding if you fall below like certain financial need. So sometimes the graduate college has like excess funding that they're able to provide for students. It's definitely on a case-by-case basis, but you have to have a FAFSA on file in order to qualify for that. Bree, definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but that's why I fill mine out every year.
It's exactly why you fill it out every year. And then just to point out, if you are not eligible to fill out a FAFSA, the alternate need determination form, which I will link, it's actually on the link that I just provided on the FindAid Apply. The alternate need determination form lets UNLV know students who will be eligible for institutional funds as opposed to federal funds. So even if you're not FAFSA eligible, get that alternate need determination form in by the deadline every year, just like it was a FAFSA application.
So somebody just wanted to clarify, international students would be able to fill this out, right?
That's exactly correct.
Great. We also had another follow-up question. Can you talk a little bit about scholarship opportunities for international students?
You want me to start?
Yes.
I would say for any of the awards that you see on the graduate college website are available to both international students and domestic students. So anything you see on there, unless it specifically states otherwise, would be open to international students. My wealth of knowledge is really at UNLV in graduate college specifically. So if Nicole or Janet has any other information to add.
Yeah, I think what you'll find is that, you know, there are some federal grants that are specific for graduate student education. The caveat there is that if they are in particular related to particular entities, such as the Department of Defense, they may be more exclusive, requiring citizenship to apply for those.
Yeah, so there are different requirements for different fellowships and grants. I can say that the scholarships or travel funding awarded through GPSA, so anything to do with your research or travel, those are available to international students. As long as you're enrolled in graduate school at UNLV, you're eligible to apply for any of the GPSA scholarships and grants.
Thank you for adding that, Nicole. Can you all provide us with kind of an overview of what the actual application process looks like for scholarships and fellowships? So from, you know, submitting the application to any supplemental material to the applicable interviews and when to expect a decision, just kind of like an overview of that process.
So it all starts with Bree's team, right? So
Yes.
you want to do that part, Bree, and then I'll take it
I'll
from the
jump in.
committee review.
Absolutely. So we open the portal on October 1st every year. I'll probably say October 1st a million times today. So that's when students are able to start submitting applications through the GradRibble Gateway. I'm going to pop another link in here. This is the graduate college scholarship or funding page, but you'll see the link for scholarships and fellowships there. From here, we provide general information and guidelines. We show you the required application materials, and also super important, we show the rubric that the committee will be using to judge the applications. So I'd really suggest just taking a look at the website, seeing what awards are out there, what you qualify for, and start preparing your application materials. So once we open the portal, students can start submitting. You're going to log into your Graduable Gateway, and you're going to click on your My Funding tab. And that is going to allow you guys to see graduate assistantships and scholarships and fellowships. From here is when you're going to start submitting your application. You're going to upload your CV, your statement of purpose, your recommendation provider information. Really important on your recommendation provider. I would suggest reaching out to your recommendation provider at the time that you apply to let them know that your application, that you've applied for scholarships and fellowships, and that they're going to receive an email from the graduate college asking them to submit a letter of recommendation for you. Let your recommendation provider know what you're applying for, what those requirements are. So when you're applying in the system, you can actually choose to use the same recommendation provider for all of the awards that you apply for, or you can select a new one each time. When you're putting in the information for your recommendation provider, they are just getting one email if you are choosing to use that recommendation provider throughout. So it's really important to have that line of communication. So while the deadline for scholarships and fellowships is December 1st, we give the recommendation providers up until December 15th to get those letters into the graduate college. And the reason why we allow this is because once your application is submitted to the graduate college, we wait for grades to be posted for that current semester before we start checking the awards. So basically my team goes through, and I think we received somewhere about over 1,000 applications for scholarships and fellowships. We go through each award or each application. We make sure that the student has submitted all the application materials, that they meet the requirements, just the basic requirements of the award based on program, level, GPA, and then we're checking for that letter of recommendation. Once we take all of that information, we check all the applications, that's when we shoot it over to the committee, and the committee really starts doing their work starting in January up until I would say about mid-February. And that's when Janet and her team kind of take over the review of those scholarships and fellowship applications.
All right, great, Bree. You get that timeline all down.
Oh yeah.
So yes, and if it wasn't for Bree's team, this would probably be impossible for the faculty review committee because there are a lot of applications. And yes, the committee does read every single letter of recommendation. So let me go back and make another couple of general comments and then some specifics. So relative to the timeline, again, as Bree said, one of the last holdups is the posting of the semester grades because that influences GPA, which is criteria cutoff for some of these applications. Yeah, as strange as it may seem to you, many faculty are also on 9-month contracts, so have winter break off. So they, just like you, are typically on vacation during this time. And that is why the committee often does not convene until that second week in January, when faculty are required to be back 1 week before classes start. So then it becomes a really, really heavy lift. All of the committee members are reading all of the applications. We do follow the rubric specifically, so pay attention to the rubric. Make sure your application is complete. But let me focus back to that recommendation letter piece. It is weighted according to the rubric, but it is an important piece because that is the place where you can really shine as an applicant. There are, I will tell you from a professor point of view, and I've done this for more years than probably some of you have been on this earth. So I have a little bit of experience. And in essence, you're not going to get a negative recommendation letter, but you can get kind of a vanilla recommendation letter, one that doesn't really say anything, or you can get a really, really supportive recommendation letter. And this requires the fact that that recommender knows you and knows what you're doing. And it goes back exactly to what Brianna said about having that conversation. And I'm going to flip this quickly to Nicole and put her on the spot. Say, Nicole, you were successful with that NASA grant. How did you think your advisor's recommendation letter fit into your package?
So that's a really interesting question because I applied for that fellowship at the beginning of my master's career. So I really had to prove to the committee that even though I hadn't done a ton of work in my master's yet, that I was like essentially qualified for funding. So that letter of recommendation really played a role in having a faculty member saying like, hey, this student is a good student. I have seen the student put out good products before, and I'm confident that this student will be able to continue putting out good products, which is why you should fund them. But a lot of times, if you're new in the field or you haven't really applied for any awards or anything yet, faculty members are the ones that vouch for you. Like that is the person in the room who has secured funding already, usually from different agencies. So having them be able to vouch for you and say, this is someone who deserves funding, it really makes a difference. It does. And you could tell the difference between a letter that says, oh, the student got an A in my course and they were a good student versus, oh, this student may have gotten an A in my course, but they are also, X, Y, and Z, and they're good at fulfilling these projects. They work on these types of things for me. And they really cater it specifically to the student as opposed to just being kind of a blanket letter.
That's spot on, Nicole, spot on. The other thing to think about in the recommendation letter is it's not just all academics. It's not just GPA. I keep saying GPSA. It's not just grade point average, and it's not just, they participated in my class, but it may be they're collaborative, they're hardworking, they seem to be a critical thinker. They're very prompt, they meet deadlines, things like that. So the attributes that strengthen you as a person and a person who can work in interdisciplinary groups or cross-cultural groups, any of these things are attributes also that can pull a lot of weight in a recommendation letter.
Janet, I'm going to put you on the spot for a second. So as you know, I'm not on the scholarship and fellowship committee, but I do see all of the application materials. What is your thoughts on a personal recommendation versus a professional or academic? Because, students in our portal, you can put anybody down as a recommendation provider.
Right. So that depends on, I think, what you're applying for. But certainly, I think everything in the graduate college has to do with academics, right? So you don't want your twin sister writing your letter. You want someone who can speak to your academics as well. You may be choosing between a professor on campus and a supervisor you had in your summer job. And perhaps you have great rapport with both of those two. It would be the wisest to choose your academic advisor in that situation.
And I just adding on to that, I have worked with several students who have said, hey, like I don't have an academic person that like I feel close enough to write a letter of rec. What I suggest in those situations is providing a faculty member where, like, say you've had a course with them or you're currently enrolled in a course with them, seeing if you could set up a meeting with them to kind of talk through like, hey, I'm really interested in this application. I'm really interested in potentially getting a letter of recommendation from you. And they will let you know if they're not comfortable writing that. Like, good faculty members will let you know if they are uncomfortable writing that for you because they shouldn't submit like a subpar application. But if you do have a faculty member who's willing to do that, but you don't know them very well, provide them with a copy of your CV, have a meeting with them, and really walk them through like, hey, here's everything that I do outside of my academics as well. Just so for them to get to know you a little bit better in order to write a stronger letter.
Those are excellent points, Nicole. And failing to take that step results in what I refer to as kind of that generic letter that so-and-so is a good student, they have this grade point average, and I think they'll do well in this situation. And that's not necessarily what you want in that letter. So excellent points, Nicole. Thank you.
Thank you all. We received a few questions in the chat here, so I'm going to go back a little bit and ask a few of them. Someone asked, do you have to have financial need to qualify for a graduate college scholarship? And does UNLV have any merit-based scholarships available?
So for the graduate college, not all of our scholarships are need-based. When you take a look at the link that I provided with the scholarships and fellowships we do have, some of them will specifically say this is a need-based award. Like one of our biggest need-based awards is the Patricia Sastanek, which is $2,500, and we give out about 50 of them every year. So that's one of our bigger need-based awards. As far as UNLV as a whole, I would say yes, there's definitely merit-based scholarships out there. I would suggest going to the financial aid website and kind of looking through there to see what's available.
Thank you, Bree. And then somebody wanted to clarify on FAFSA, if they submitted their FAFSA last August, do they need to submit again by October 1st for the following year?
Yeah, so you want to take a look at the FAFSA that you submitted and what year it was for. And so you want to start that application for the October 1st for the upcoming academic year.
Great. And then I had another student let us know that they're an international student from Bangladesh and have already applied for an MIS program for spring 2022. And they were wondering if they're eligible to apply for any particular scholarship before receiving admission decision.
So I guess that's back to me, at least for the graduate college portion. So when you're on our student funding page, you're going to see a link that says current students and new students. So if you're a brand new student for spring 2022, you're going to click on that new student tab to see what's available to you and just kind of look through that. I would say a majority of the scholarships and fellowships that we have for that December 1st deadline, they're for current students. They start the next academic year. But definitely check out the new student funding page to look through there. Make sure that you have that alternate need determination form on file, because that's going to make you eligible for grants. And sometimes funding becomes available mid-year, and we're looking through applications to see if we have any students that meet certain qualifications for certain awards. So definitely still apply. Check out the website.
Great, thank you. And then I had another question pop up. How many recommendation letters are considered sufficient for an application?
I think there's only one, isn't there, Bree?
Yep,
That's what I thought.
just one per application.
As we were talking earlier, it may be, you may choose different referees for different award mechanisms. If one is more focused on your laboratory work, then you'll want that particular person. If one is more based upon community service needs or something, then you'll want that person. So I think that since you only have one choice there, give it some good thought.
Thank you. So for our next question, we know that there are thousands of scholarship opportunities outside of the graduate college. Do you all have any tips on how to plan a strategic scholarship search?
So I can start.
Okay.
I use a software that UNLV has called Pivot. So it's PIVOT. I can't remember the actual website, but if anyone has a link to it, you could put that in the chat. That would be great. But this essentially gives you funding alerts. So you could set specific criteria. So like my criteria is set to like science, education, STEM funding, and then also encompassing like, okay, specifically for first year's PhD students, or specifically for people who already have a master's. So you could set these different specifications and then they'll send you email updates. You could set it for every day, you could set it for once a week, and it'll give you a summary of all the new scholarships and grants that may have been posted in your area. Along with that, signing up for email lists or newsletters. If you're in the sciences, Nevada NASA is fantastic at sending out opportunities and newsletters. But there are a ton of different programs where, like if you're interested in getting NIH funding or National Institute of Health, or if you're interested in getting NSF funding, National Science Foundation, signing up for their newsletters, checking their websites, and planning ahead. So a lot of these things usually open up like a year down the line, or it's like a lengthy funding cycle. So being sure that you kind of have those on your radar. You don't have to apply for all of them your first year. Like there are so many of them that I'm not qualified for yet, that I am planning for next year. So definitely looking at those sites and kind of setting up alerts for yourself, because you'll get bogged down in school and other things, and then you'll be like, oh my gosh, funding deadline totally passed me. And we don't want that to happen.
So that's all good information. Keep in mind as you're looking at greater like national agencies like the National Institutes of Health and such and so on, those are typically very involved applications. So you do need to plan, and you do need to work with your mentor, your advisor on these things. There's often need to work in tandem with them. But one particular funding source that is often overlooked and tend to be both less rigorous in volume, not in science or the focus. They seem to be shorter, perhaps not as great a dollar value, but this would be your professional organizations. Most, if not all, professional organizations have student funding for anything from research funding to travel to even support to attend another institution for a workshop or something like that. So don't overlook what's a little closer to home with you or for you.
Would our graduate coordinators know more about specific funding opportunities for our own department?
They should, because they should be familiar with the various professional organizations within the discipline. So, for example, my home is kinesiology and nutrition sciences. So I'm familiar with the American College of Sports Medicine, for example, the International Society of Biomechanics, the American Physiology Association. So your graduate coordinator, if they themselves are not familiar with the scholarship opportunities for professional organizations, they can certainly reach out to the faculty members who teach in those areas and do research in those areas and get that information for you. Or there's nothing wrong with you asking a professor in humanities that you've taken their class and you've really enjoyed the work, and ask them what organizations do they belong to, and are there any resources available?
Great, thank you. So going back a little bit to the actual application, are there some components that are weighed more heavily than others, or is it kind of a case-by-case basis?
It's been a year since I did this, so I don't remember the rubric, but it is posted, and I think the scores, they're categories, and then they're all equally weighted.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I'll post the rubric again in the chat just in case anybody missed it. But you'll see for the grad college rubric that we have each component of the application, and they're all basically ranked, 8 to 10 being the highest, and then going down from there.
So the answer to the question then would be each of the categories is equally weighted.
Great, thank you. And a kind of a follow-up question for Dr. Dufek, since you've served on these committees, are there any specific characteristics that you all look for when reviewing scholarship or fellowship applications?
Oh my gosh, my pet peeve is proofread. We all have software that, using Word, we see those little squiggly lines in your document. Go and look and see what the problem is. So, a couple of things. One is, the grammar and how you put words together. Make sure that makes sense. It would be reasonable and certainly not a bad ask to even ask your peers to read something, or your advisor. The other thing is completeness, making sure that everything that is requested is in your packet. The third point, and I don't remember specifically, the different awards had different directions, but if you are given a 2-page maximum to write X, please, please, please provide 2 pages. If you provide one single paragraph when you're given 2 pages, the reviewer is going to say, well, I guess they don't have much to say about this, or they're not very strong in this. And there's nothing, Grammarly, that's right. There's nothing wrong with using white space to be your friend. The document does not have to be all text from top to bottom, 8.5-inch by 11 paper with 1-inch margins and 12-point font. if there are directions like that, that give you specific fonts and margins and all of that, pay attention to those details as well. But I would say proofread, make sure your sentence structure and your thoughts are logical and orderly. Let somebody else take a look at it. And total inclusion, everything that is asked for. You can't just skip a category, right? Well, if you do, it's not going to bode well for you. So hopefully I've answered that question.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to pause again for a minute to remind everyone to please type any questions you have in the chat, or if you'd like to just unmute yourself and ask the questions, please do so. But while you all think about those, we do have another question here, and it is, what effect will outside scholarships have on my financial aid package? Maybe for Bree?
Sure. So outside scholarships and fellowships can affect your financial aid package and the amount of loans that you're able to take out through financial aid. So any institution that you attend cannot give you more funding than it costs to attend. So you cannot be awarded more than cost of attendance. And things that factor into cost of attendance are, your tuition, your books, your living fees. I will post a link to the cost of attendance and how that's calculated for UNLV. But basically, any award that you get could reduce the amount of financial aid that you receive, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because if you're taking out a lot of loans to pay for your education, those awards are going to help reduce that amount. So yes, it can impact it. To what extent, I am not super knowledgeable on that, but financial aid does have all of that information. And they have this great self-service where you can log in and ask questions of financial aid via the self-service, and they'll get a response back to you. And they have a lot of great FAQs and things like that, so you can peruse through there.
And if I could add on to that as well, on my UNLV, there is a tool where you're able to go to your financial aid. It's like a little square box, and it's like financial aid. And then you could click on 2021, 22, and then eventually 22, 23. But your specific year, you should be able to look at your expected family contribution versus estimated financial need. So that's not like the say all end all. That's definitely not like 100% always accurate. But it really gives me a good way of gauging, like, okay, like my estimated contribution is, $1,000, but my estimated need is $20,000. So that means that I could get $19,000 in scholarships or funding. So that's kind of like a quick calculation you can do. And that'll kind of help you look at it when you go into financial aid to talk to them. So like one of the requirements of my fellowship was that I check with financial aid and get approval from them that it wouldn't set me over my estimated need. Because then if it sets you over your estimated need, then that money could probably go to other students. So that's kind of how they calculate that. There's a lot involved, but hopefully that helps kind of guide you through that process, because, I don't want you getting money and then not being able to get that money. So.
Thank you, Nicole. We do have a follow-up question, and this might be for Bree, but does getting a GA ship influence the amount of financial aid one can receive?
So your GA tuition package does go onto your financial aid. And so if you do receive, GA and so much funding, that could impact your cost of attendance and how much you can take out in loans. To be honest, I don't see that happening very often, but it does happen from time to time. As far as graduate college fellowships go, we do ask that when students receive a fellowship from the graduate college that they do not take a GA at that time. That is for graduate college awards, but other fellowships will vary based on the funding source.
Oh, I have one thing to add. Since we're talking about timelines and FAFSA and apply every year, remember you have to apply for your GA ship every year.
Yes, thank you, Janet. Very important.
So our next question, oh, go ahead, Carly, go ahead.
I have a question about a very specific scholarship. It's the Graduate Access Child Care Scholarship. So two things. It's a little bit confusing because it says that there, it's an open scholarship that doesn't necessarily have a deadline, but it does refer to a deadline a few times throughout the description. And my question about this scholarship is, are you allowed to preemptively apply for this scholarship? The wording is such that it makes me, you seem to have to already be in childcare in order to apply for it. But if I planned on applying for it for next spring, for example, and I'm not currently in childcare, but that's because I don't have enough money to be in childcare, and I'm sure a lot of graduate students are in the same boat. Can you just speak to that if y'all have any idea? Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is probably one for me because I specifically oversee the child care scholarship. And you're right, it doesn't have a deadline. We keep that application open. But if you're on the Graduable Gateway, you might see a deadline on there because we have to close it at one point to reopen it for the next academic year to get the funding in, right? And so the thing with the child care scholarship is that we do actually need to see the receipts from the child care organization, right? They have to have a tax ID. And we do need to see those receipts in order to be able to fund the students on those ones. So if it comes to an issue of, not being able to afford childcare, you kind of get into that like circular thing. You can't afford it, so you don't have the receipts to provide it. I would say reach out to me and we'll see what we can do to work with students on an individual basis. I'd also like to point out that we do have the Graduate College Emergency Retention Grant that students can apply for. So like if you are in a dire need for childcare and you're not eligible for this award, you could apply for an emergency retention grant to kind of help hold you over until you're able to, provide the correct documentation. And those emergency retention grants are for, any type of dire financial need that a graduate student might run into, whether it's loss of employment, needing additional credits that you didn't know about to graduate. We've had students apply because their car was broken into and all their laptop and all of their, school supplies were stolen. So we just run a gamut of, applications for financial needs. So always use that as a resource if you find yourself in a bind.
So Bree, I have a clarifying question for Carly. Let's say in this scenario that I want to go forward with childcare in spring of 2022. I don't have any receipts yet. I go ahead and get involved with childcare. I get my first month receipt back. Then can I apply? And would that be reasonable?
Yeah, that would be reasonable. So with the childcare scholarship, because I'm the one that's waiting for the receipts and stuff like that, if I get an application without a receipt on it, I have someone from my team reach out to the applicant and I say, hey, we're not going to approve this and we're not going to deny it. As soon as you get that first receipt, email it over to us. We'll upload it and then we'll review your application then. So I'll keep those open basically through that academic year to see if any receipts come in. And we're always happy to work with students, to help receive that funding.
Thank you all. So we got another question in the chat here. If you are eligible to apply for more than one fellowship through UNLV, does it harm your application as it moves to the committee to apply for multiple fellowships, or should you select just one to apply for?
My suggestion, having served as past co-chair, is apply for all of those that you're eligible for. Because the committee does, you may choose one that you think you're eligible for and you make application, and let's say there are 2 awards and you're ranked 3rd and drat, you're out of luck. Whereas if you might have applied for several others, you might have been ranked either 1st or 2nd and received that one and not the other one. So there is, the opportunity for making several applications. As well, the committee is very careful to kind of spread the wealth, if you will, right? So if there's an individual who ranks, let's say, hypothetically, top on 2 awards, the committee will probably say, okay, what's the best financial situation for that person, and make that award, and then look down the list to try to once again spread the wealth.
I would definitely agree with Janet on that. Throw your name in the hat if you are eligible. I've seen where students only applied for one and the committee's like, oh, why didn't they apply for this one? They would have been a great candidate for it. The only caveat to that, I would say the president's fellowship, you have to be nominated by your department, and each department can only nominate one. So if you are applying for the President's Fellowship, reach out to your department chair, your grad coordinator, and say, have you picked someone to nominate yet? I'm interested. That's a big one on that one.
So our next question is directed towards Nicole. As a previous scholarship recipient, can you provide us some maybe tips for success as we are embarking on our journey to do our own applications?
Yeah, definitely. So planning ahead is my first piece of advice. When I first started, I started in the spring semester, and then I wasn't really eligible for any of the scholarships because I didn't have enough credits. So I was like, what do I do? So being able to plan ahead like a year in advance really benefited me because I was able to kind of plan out like, okay, well, this is what I'm applying for next year, and these are the things I have to get together. And then also giving your letter writers time to write the letters. You don't want to approach your professor a week before the deadline and say, oh my gosh, I need this letter. Can you please write this for me? Try to give them at least a couple weeks, if not a month. Um, Usually I give my advisor a month, and then I send a follow-up email maybe 15 days in if I haven't seen it yet. Or I just check in and I'm like, hey, just checking in, making sure that you know when the deadline is. Another piece of advice is I always print out either the rubric or the directions. So then that way I know for sure I could go through and highlight the things that I've already done. The where students usually not mess things up, but where students might lose points is that they just completely miss a section of the rubric. Say they're like, oh, okay, well, I don't have any research experience, so I'm not going to include my research. Or I don't do community service, so I'm not going to include my community service contributions. All of those things are still in the rubric, which means that you're going to be evaluated on it. So even if you don't necessarily think that you have something that fits that specific point, still try to include some sentence about it. Definitely at least acknowledge it, because the people scoring your application will be looking for that. So being able to go through that list of requirements, marking things off that you've done, double, triple check it, and make sure that your formatting is right. Because you don't want to do all of this work and then have your application thrown out because your formatting isn't correct, or you didn't put everything into a PDF, or they wanted one document and you submitted 3. So lots of different things like that, but just making sure that all of those things are correct and then worrying about the content itself.
Thank you, Nicole. Let's see. So we got another question in the chat. Does the committee ever look at LinkedIn for the recipients as they're going through the applications?
I think that would be on an individual participant basis. Myself, I don't. I look at the dossier, what's in front of me. It's not unlike what promotion tenure, your academic faculty do. It's not anything that's expected or required. And sometimes, it's frowned upon because that may give one applicant, an advantage over another. So in committees that I've chaired, we've agreed that we would look only at what was submitted, go forward from that point.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have any more questions for our panel here? You were all just so thorough and gave so much great information.
I do have another piece of advice.
Sure.
So there is no failed application. Like, get that idea out of your head. Because I have applied for things before that haven't been funded, and then I have taken that same application, chunks of it, whether that's like my method section or my background info, different pieces of it that I really liked that might apply to a different scholarship. you should never just scrap an entire application and be like, this is no longer useful to me. Different parts of it could still be useful. There are things that I put in my first funding application that I ended up including in my thesis. So like 100% things will carry through, and you might write something that you really like, and even if the review team doesn't like it, that's okay. Like still hold on to that. Like don't delete your stuff. I have a nice little folder on my computer that says rejections are a part of life. And whenever, if I get rejected from something, I just drop it into that folder because I'm like, you know what? I might not process this right now, but like I will deal with it. It's not the end of the world. Like I have failed plenty of things and I am still sitting here today. So please do not get discouraged. There are just so many fantastic applications. Sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you write a really fantastic app. It depends on the setting and the people, but just never discount your own work. Like keep parts of it, you could always improve on it, you could always use it for another application.
Excellent, Nicole. Thank you for that.
I did have one follow-up question in the chat. So for international student opportunities, where do they just go on the same website, Bree, that for the fellowships, and where does it indicate which one's open for international versus not, and is there any other places where they can look at international student scholarship or fellowship opportunities?
So for our graduate college scholarships and fellowships, they would all be open to international students.
Oh,
So you really just want to look at each award and see, which kind of what you meet the qualifications for based on merit, need-based GPA, all of that.
okay. So just to clarify, then all of the graduate student scholarships and fellowships are open to international students.
Yeah, and I believe, Nicole, that's the same for GPSA as well, right? As far as scholarships that are available to just international students, or specifically international, I'm not sure, but I am happy to reach out to Office of International Students and Scholars and see if we can get some information, and I'll send it to Nev and we can email it out to this group.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you for clarifying. All right, well, if nobody else has any more questions, before we end our session here today, I really want to just thank our panelists for sharing your time and expertise with us today and providing some really great tips and advice to all of us as we start to apply for our own scholarships and fellowships. And thank you all for providing us with such great questions and for engaging today. Before you all log off, if you don't mind just taking a few minutes and filling out this very brief survey. This really helps us as we plan our workshops each semester. So we would really appreciate if you do that. But I think that is all we have for you today. So I hope everyone has a really great rest of your day. Thank you all for joining us.